Hello, this is Bob. I think I did tell you that I had a mini stroke a few months ago, and my speech is still sometimes quite difficult. So if there are little hesitations or pauses, I'm trying my best to get my story out. And I don't have a lot of friends, and I don't talk a lot to people as a rule. So this is very good for me and anyone who's had a stroke and is recovering and having problems with their speech. This is an excellent way to try to, for your brain to start to be able to speak more fluently. And I think you'll find that as the minutes go on, with this podcast, I'll probably be more fluent. So I wanted to tell you about some of my experiences as a driver. I started the haulage business in about 1973, and did very well until I bought too many trucks, and old trucks tend to break down. And although I made money, the best jobs I had were in Italy every week, taking a 20-ton load of steel to Parma, Parma in Italy, and that was a preloaded trailer from MJ Love in Barking, which is London, Essex, and I got £600 for each trip, and the ferry was paid for me, so that was, but I had to pay my own expenses. But I got £600, but he didn't give me the £600 in one go. He gave me enough to get to Milan. Then I had to go to an office in Milan, and then they would give me the rest of the money. It's called running money, so you can get to your destination and back. It covers your fuel and the tolls on the motorways, but the ferry is paid for by the contractor, and that was very good. I went to Italy many times. Every week I would go on a Sunday night. Excuse me. I'd get to Parma probably 3 or 4 o'clock on Monday, and if I was lucky and got there before they'd closed, then I'd get unloaded the same day, and I would usually sleep the night there and then travel back on the Tuesday and be back in the UK Wednesday. And then I'd do this. I did that trip once a week for, I did many trips. Not only did I go to Parma with the steel, but I did a lot of other loads as well. I went to places like Naples, Rome, of course, and I went down to Messina to put a trailer on a ferry to Sicily. And Messina is the port right in the heel, right at the south of Italy. That's the furthest I've been. I've been to many places in remote locations where I've collected loads of wine to bring back to the UK. So I've had a lot of experience. I'm only telling you this because I often had been driving through France. A well-known place we'd stop at is the Bakehouse. Drivers would often stop there and talk. Another place, when you go, after the Bakehouse, once you get to, you get into France, and we take the Mont Blanc or Monte Bianco, the Mont Blanc tunnel. It's a steady climb up to the tunnel. With a heavy load, you have to use low gears, and you get through the customs, and then you do the descent to Aosta, which is in the valley. It's called the Aosta Valley, where once again you do your customs. And I should say that when you're driving down that, it's a winding road down the Alps. You have to don't use your brakes too much, because if your brakes get too hot and they fade, you could lose control. So use the gearbox as much as you can. Now, if you're a truck driver, what I'm telling you, you'll know. All experienced truck drivers know how to drive. Or if you're a very new truck driver, maybe you don't understand this. But using your gear, and with some vehicles, on two of my trucks, I had a pedal which I could push, which was an exhaust brake. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but it was an exhaust brake which really helped to slow the vehicle down, to control the speed. And you use the gearbox, yeah. And but I did see there are many places where you're going very close to ravines and looking down, and you can see there are places where trucks have gone over, and the wreckage is down the bottom of the valley, and you see that. And but anyway, I was always a fast driver, but very careful. I've never had a crash with a truck. In fact, I only ever had one crash in any vehicle as a driver, but with the first car that I bought when I was 17. I bought my first car, and I wasn't 17. I had a little drive with my father's Jaguar. He had a Jaguar, and he used to have a lock-up garage with a long alleyway, and he would let me drive along there. Maybe when I was 15, 16, he would let me drive there to the road. A bit of a treat for me, really. So I had a good idea that it's not that hard to drive a car, is it? Really, not when you think about it. You've got the clutch, you've got the brake, you've got the accelerator pedal, and you've got a gearbox. And I'm going to tell you about this because you might be interested in how I started. That I was actually I was working in advertising for about 5 years in London. I was working in the Strand. I had a girlfriend who worked on the other side of the road. I worked at T.G. Scott at number 2 Clements Inn in the Strand, and she worked for Twinings, the tea company, on the opposite side of the road. And we used to often meet each other after work at 5 o'clock and walk along the Strand and take the 5:20 train from Charing Cross to Brockley, yeah, which is southeast 4. And the previous day, Twinings had run a Christmas party, and I'd been allowed to go. And at that time, it was the Teddy Boy era, where we wore these very nice blue velvet suits with the nice suede collars. I had the what's the hairstyle we used to use? Elvis Presley hairstyle, and the drainpipe trousers and the thick shoes. I can't remember some of these details, but anyway, I went to the party and at that time I used to smoke. I started to smoke when I was 15 years. At the time I worked in a firm just off of Parliament Square in Old Queen Street, at a firm called Alden Tilbury that no longer exists. And there was a little shop there where I could go there, and you could buy a little packet of 5 cigarettes You can't do that now, but you could then. And I worked there, and that was my very first job. I told you that I worked for the Sunday Mirror. That was after I'd been very, very ill with Crohn's disease. And the Sunday Mirror, they actually paid my wages for 3 months and then said they had to stop because it looked like I wasn't going to be going back. And I remember being in hospital then, and I loved Guy Fawkes night, bonfire night. And I said to Mum, I went into the hospital in October, and I think when my mother visited me, I said, "Will I be home for Guy Fawkes night?" And she didn't say yes or no. And then I thought, "Will I be home for Christmas?" It was a long time, 6 months there. And when I was then, I had the surgery in the spring, and I was recovering, and I said to my mother, could we get a TV? And my mother said, oh, well, my dad can't afford the deposit. At that time, people used to rent their TVs by the month. I think it was about £3 a month for a TV, and you might have to put down about a £10 deposit. And I said to my mother, because the Sunday Mirror had paid the wages, so the money had been saved, and I hadn't spent any of that money. So I said to my mother, look, Mum, I can pay the deposit for Dad if we get the TV. So she said, okay, I'll tell Dad. So that's how we got the first television. And the first TV we had, that would have been, I was born in 1939. I became ill in 1954 when I was 15. So we got the TV when I was 15, in the spring when I was 15, before I went to the convalescent home. So that's how we got the first TV. The only other TV I'd ever seen before, really I'm going off the track of my story, I know that. I expect this is irritating for you, but I can't help it. Unless I make copious notes and read to you as if this is a book. This is not a book. I'm trying to tell you how my life was. And I know TV isn't important, but I just want to say very, very quickly that because it does link to this, about the TV, that the first TV that I saw, when we moved from St Albans, where I was at school, my father got a job in London, we had to move. He rented a flat, only had 2 bedrooms, and he told the estate agents that he had 2 daughters, and didn't say he had a son. In fact, I had 2 sisters, and there was me. So my dad had 3 children. But he told the estate agents that a 2-roomed flat apartment was fine, and that he said that he didn't say that, but to me he said what he did. He took me to his sisters in Hampshire, to my Auntie Chris in a little village called Crookham. They had a little business on Crookham Crossroads in Hampshire, in the UK, right on the corner, Crookham Crossroads. And my auntie was really nice, very nice. When I got there, she made me so welcome that I had 2 cousins there, Graham and Morris. They never spoke to me once. I was with my aunt for 6 months, and they never spoke to me once. It's like I didn't exist. And my Uncle Dave, that's my auntie, that's my auntie's husband, he also never spoke to me. He was a very quiet, silent man. He didn't give me any black looks, but he never actually spoke to me. My Auntie Chris, when I arrived, she called me Bobby. She said, Bobby, I'm going to give you the blue room. So I had my own little bedroom, and she called it the blue room because everything was decorated blue inside. And every day she would make me a packet of jam sandwiches, and she'd give me a bottle of squash. And she had a little dog called Perry, a little white dog. And I would take Perry, and I'd be off in the day with my sandwiches and bottle of squash and the dog. And I'd be in Hampshire in the forest and the woods. I'd look at the army range where the tanks were manoeuvring in the forest. I love the countryside. And I was there for 6 months. They sent me to a private school when because I think the first 2 months I was there in April, so I was sent to a private school until the summer holidays started. And I've never been to a private school in my life. They were all posh kids who were, I thought, strange. Nothing like the boys I'd ever seen before. And I didn't learn anything there, nothing. But when the summer holidays started, that was when I used to take the dog Perry with the sandwiches and squash and wander the countryside on my own, exploring, and I loved it. And I was with my Auntie Chris for 6 months, and the TV, every tea time between 4 and 5 o'clock, she had the TV was very small, about 1 foot square. It was in a little wooden cabinet, tall, standing about so high, about, I can't say so high, but anyway, at the top there's 2 little doors. She opened the doors and turned the TV on. There's a little screen. We'd watch programs like Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men, and Watch with Mother, and there was the little donkey. So we used to watch the TV there for about an hour between 4 and 5 o'clock while we had our tea. And that was the first TV I'd ever seen in my life, and it was a very fuzzy black and white picture, not very sharp, but it was lovely. From a very young age, I'd always loved the cinema. I'd often gone to the cinema when they opened at 1 o'clock. I paid my sixpence. I'd go in at 1 o'clock, and the whole show would last 3 hours. The main film, cartoons and news, and I would sit through that program for 3 hours, and then I'd stay there and sit through it again. And then after the 6 hours, I'd sit through it again, and I'd come out at night about 10:30 at night. I'd come out in the night with the lights. I'd been watching the same movie, the same cartoons for 9 hours. That's how I loved it, and I always loved movies from a very young age. I still do now. I love movies. I believe the fact that me talking to you now, if I could show this as a movie, you wouldn't have to listen to these words. And that's what I like about movies, that the picture should tell you the story. You don't need a lot of dialogue. But that's off the point. I'm going to come back very quickly now to this topic is supposed to be my trucks. Business went very well. I bought the Volvo, a fairly new truck. I set off on the trip, crossed the channel. I had to take the train from Cologne because at that time I couldn't get a transit. I've got to tell you something now. I'm sorry to go back. I did many trips to Yugoslavia. Now, in the early 70s, it was very hard to get the documentation to go through. For example, in Italy, all these trips I did to Italy, I think there was a green paper which I had to have stamped at the customs, and they always used to look at the paper, and then they would look at me, and always I would slide across the counter 6,000 lira. And they always took it was pure bribery. And yeah, really. They took the money and then they stamped the document, and that was the custom finished. And also another thing I can tell you is that they were on the way back, and the same place, they would often want to come and look to see what I've got in the in what my load was, and sometimes they'd make me open the trailer and they'd have a look in there, and if there was something they liked, it could be leather jackets, it could be all kinds of things, and I'm afraid to say that they would often take maybe two or three leather jackets, and I thought to myself, well, if they could do that, I'll have two or three leather jackets. So I often came back with stuff, with not stuff that I'd taken off the load, because after I'd taken what I wanted, and the customs taken what they wanted, the truck was sealed again with a custom seal. So on my trips to Italy, I brought back loads of stuff. I even brought back some naughty magazines. At that time, they were quite kind of risque things, you know, Playboy magazines and that. Didn't interest me too much, but I bought some back because some of my friends said, "Can you bring me some magazines back?" You couldn't get those in the UK, not unless you went to Soho, to the horrible shops in Soho, and you go into the shop and you got any magazines, and you know they're really under the counter. I don't want to go into that. I never frequented that kind of place. But I want to tell you about the documentation was all false. No problem in Italy. The green paper there, they always stamped it 6,000 lira fine. You know, if I got stopped on the road in France for speeding or breaking some law, the French police would pull me over and they would stop me. And one thing you learned was that you had to pay an on-the-spot fine. I don't remember how much it was. It could be 50 francs or 100 francs. But I remember this. There was two ways you could pay this. You could either say, I think billet is a ticket in French. So when they're writing out this fine, you just say to the policeman there, a billet, and you take out some money, 50 euros, and you hand it to them, and they take the money and don't give you a ticket. That is absolutely true. Now that kind of situation didn't happen in Germany, never. There was no corruption in Germany at all. And I'm going to come to that later on. But I want to tell you about this very quite amusing situation, because I went to Yugoslavia many, many times. And some of the stuff I took there, you wouldn't believe. Yugoslavia didn't have a lot of stuff that we threw away, which was crap, old TVs and radios and all kinds of junk, and old cars, old vehicles. They bought all that in Yugoslavia. They didn't have any. And I went to, and going through the border in Yugoslavia, I had a white paper, an A4 size paper. And usually I got through the customs there with no problem. But at one time they called me into the office, the customs office, and they sat me down, and the customs guy was sitting across the desk, and he said to me, "This paper," he said, "it's not genuine. It's a forgery." I said, "What? Forgery?" I said, "I've been travelling many months to Yugoslavia. No, they're good papers. This paper's fine. Nothing wrong." And he said to me, "Just look at this." And he held the paper up so that the light from the window shone through it. And you could see the watermark, Basil and Bond. Now, whether you know or whether you don't know, Basil and Bond is a make of paper which is only made in the UK. And so it wasn't issued by the Yugoslavian government at all. It was a forgery. And he looked at him, and I said, "Well, I can't believe it." He said, "What can you tell me about this?" I said, well, I can only tell you that this paper has been provided by my firm. He said, tell me the name of your firm. So I very quickly made up a fictitious name. He said, who's the manager? I gave him a fictitious name, okay? And he said, okay, we'll contact them. He said, and he stamped the paper and he said, you can go. I think the reason they let me go is because they needed the stuff. But I got through that okay. It took me 2 or 3 hours, and I talked about the situation. But another time, I was with my friend Mick that got killed in Belgium when he got crushed by the load of timber falling from the forklift truck. But this was I was with Mick doing a journey in Yugoslavia, and it was in the winter time. It always seemed to be in the winter. It nearly always is in Yugoslavia, winter. But anyway, we'd gone through Belgrade, or Beograd, as they say, in Yugoslavia. It was all one country in Yugoslavia. It wasn't broken up. And we were leaving Belgrade, and we were going up a fairly long hill, and my vehicle had much more power than his. And it's, when you're driving a vehicle, you've got to keep the speed constant, and you've got to keep the vehicle moving. So I overtook him, and as I pulled back in front of him, I must have just caught a tiny little piece of the tilt, which is a reinforced plastic blue. There was a tiny tear, only about 3 inches long. Now, we were going to Nekotino, which is right in the south of Yugoslavia, very close to the Greek border, near Skopje, very close to the Greek border. When we got to the customs and they saw that little tear, they insisted that we take the trucks to a compound, and it had to be all unloaded, not by the drivers, but they unloaded the whole lot. They checked the contents, they put it all back in again. The whole thing took us about a day or more. And eventually we were cleared, and the trucks went to the delivery address, and they were unloaded. No problem. But then we did a rather foolish thing. See, with trucking, you don't remember the good times. You don't remember all the tricks, all the good trips. You don't remember all the good trips. You remember the bad ones. You don't remember the good times, all the money you made. You remember the times when you lost your money and your business went bust. But this trip to Yugoslavia, there were 2 of us. We had 2 tractor units and 2 trailers. We thought, what a good idea. Instead of us driving the 2 vehicles back all this way and using diesel for 2 trucks, why don't we put one truck on top of the other? What a good idea. Now this meant that we had to strip the trailers down. The tilt is made up of a metal framework. We had to strip the trailers down. Mick and I, we did that, and then we found a place where there was a ramp where you could reverse the trailer up to and drive the other, tractor unit and trailer onto the other truck, and secured it by chains, special chains with locks. Now, while this was going on, I had a tummy upset. You know, it happens sometimes. I had a tummy upset, and I needed to find a toilet. And I walked along the road there. There was a wire fence there, and there's a big compound. And I found a little gap in the fence, and I went through there. And I walked to the right, and I found a brick building with a toilet. And I went in there. I used the toilet. I had a bad tummy, and all I had on at the time was, I said this was winter. No, because I think all I had on was, I'm not sure, but anyway, no, it was the winter, but I only had, in the south it was quite warm, near Greece, And I remember this because when I came out of the toilet, I was arrested by some officials that worked for the company there. And I didn't speak a word of Yugoslavian or whatever the language is they spoke there. I never did learn any language Yugoslavia. Most other countries, I would picked up a bit of the language, but there I didn't know a word. And they took me into an office and called the police. And they kept me there, and then they eventually called someone who could translate. And when they got somebody who could translate, I was there 12 hours, and somebody came, and because I'd gone there, I didn't have any identification papers with me at all. Excuse me, I had no passport, no driver's license, nothing, because I had just normal clothes and a pair of jeans. And when the translator came, I explained that to him, and they actually, I'm not saying they didn't believe me, but they said, okay. I told them that what we were doing with these two trucks, and they said, okay, we will take you to the trucks and we will see if this is true. And they took me there. I'd been there overnight, and Mick, he didn't know where I disappeared to. It was about 9 o'clock the following morning when we walked there with the police and customs to the trucks, and I got my papers, and I was okay. They let me go, but Mick hadn't got a clue where I disappeared to. Right now, yeah, okay. Now I'm going to tell you something now that, yeah, I always looked up to Mick because he was the first driver that I met, and he was a great pal of mine. My wife couldn't stand him because he was dirty and oily, and also he used a lot of slang words. He wasn't a Cockney, but he used a lot of rhyming slang, or a lot of yeah. I liked him very, very much. We were great pals. Every morning, us drivers would all down to the yard. There's a little cafe just outside the yard. We'd always go there and have a coffee and a cigarette before we started anything else, and talk. It was really sociable, really nice. That is why I love the transport business so much. I've done so many different jobs in my time, but the transport business I loved. I was well, I was fit, I worked hard, I made money, I lost money, but I just loved it. I loved the business. I loved it. I can't say more than that. Anyway, what was I saying? But on the way back from Yugoslavia, we were piggybacking one truck on top of another. And we were driving, and it was snowing, and I was having to control the brakes with a handle which is called the dead man in the cab. It was so risky to use your foot brake because we were approaching the not the customs. Instead of going through Trieste, we went through a place called Nova Gorica, which was a shorter way, but it was a windy, hilly road, and the snow was deep, no snow plows, and it was very, very tricky driving. And we had been sharing the driving, but Mick came to a point. He said, "I can't do this, Bob." And I was shocked. I was surprised. I didn't say much. I said, "That's okay. That's okay. I'll take over the driving." So the last 2 or 3 hours of driving in that awful conditions. Do you know, I'm so lucky. I'm 82 years old, and I've done so many crazy things. I've been a good driver, but I've been lucky. But anyway, I was like on a tightrope. I couldn't use the brakes much, hardly at all. I had to use the gears, and I had the dead man. And we got through to Nova Gorica, got through to Italy, and then we had to reassemble the frame of these two trucks and put the tilts back together. So I'm not really sure whether we saved any time, or we might have saved a bit of diesel, but I'm not so sure that was such a good idea. But we did it. So I promise you that after this, I talk about Yugoslavia, Italy, Belgium, UK. I'm going to concentrate on my next talk to you about my trip to Iran. I promise you I will do it. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry I'm waffling on. I'm sorry I don't speak very fluently, but it's helping me. And if you've ever had any speech problems, I think you'll understand that the only way to get over this is to try your best, which I've been doing. Thank you for listening, and bye for now until I meet again. Bye-bye.